Everybody, today I'm going to be talking about the rules of the road. Probably not how I'm thinking, like not aggressive driving, speed limits, what you should obey. I'm talking about the rules of the road within the roads themselves, like what happened to where they are now. How do we have these interstates? So that's what we're going to be talking about. I'm from the United States of America, more specifically Tennessee. So I'm going to use that jurisdiction to talk about it. So first I'm going to talk about the history, and the first bit comes from the Federal Aid Road Act in 1916. So $75 million for the states to improve their roads. Now at this point the roads were like a walking trail. They were muddy and dusty. You drove on them, your tires would really get beaten down, your car would get dirty, you couldn't go fast at all. So driving on these roads, A, were really slow, B, you had to be really patient, and C, if there were multiple cars on this road, it was almost impossible to do. So this act was enabled to hope for the best during World War One, and it did. It had a positive effect, and items were getting transported with the necessity that they needed. So you got your materials, your resources were getting transported. The states started working on the roads immediately once they got this $75 million. So a big factor that was into play is the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, or AASHTO. So this set the precedent for the highway standards. They are not a government entity. They do not work for the government. The government just gets a precedent for the highway standards, such as the speed limits. They do the road tests, and their reports are so validated that we really take it into a prime measurement when deciding what's a safe speed limit. So they do road tests, and these people are transportation of everything: railroad, highway departments, you got airports, air travel, water travel. All of that stuff is taken into consideration with this group of people, and they're not a government entity. So the next act was the Highway Act in 1952. This created what we now know as the United States National Highway System. So this starts our first interstate highways. This is where our interstates come into play. And this is going to be a real beatdown to our United States routes, because I know people that prefer these U.S. routes instead of these interstates. They like the scenery, they like the old town stuff, the old shops. So what happens next is the Federal Aid Act in 1944. I did a little backtrack because we're about to realize our interstates are going to overtake everything. So this would start in effect after World War II, which ended in August of 1945, and during the next fiscal period. The act recognized the use of secondary routes. Now, some states, like Tennessee, uses these secondary routes. I know North Carolina does as well. So one of the big rules in this act were the state departments oversaw the roads. So even interstates are maintained by the state. Now, I couldn't find research to back this up, but some states may have had a competition with this. Like, I know Texas got right on it. They're like, hey, let's build these roads. And the states that acted sooner did be able to make their money back with traffic. But during this time, automobiles weren't really all that popular because we had just tailed World War II. So next, the Highway Act in 1952, which I just talked about. This is more brief now. So, this established $25 million exclusively in the interstate highway system, with more weight on interstates. There were highways, U.S. highways, that were abandoned, and this is what I was talking about. So here's the list of the U.S. highways, and these are just a little bit. So U.S. 24 got replaced by I-40 and Kansas State Route 7. Well, I mean, some people probably don't care, but State Route 7 goes, not in the middle of Kansas, but it goes from the southern border to the northern border, almost, on its eastern side, very close to its other state, whatever it may be. US 33, it got cut by the Michigan trunk line, which is like their road system. That's what Michigan calls theirs. And an Indiana state route. I believe Indiana State Route 101, but don't hold that against me. US 40, the trailing into US 40 got replaced by I-80. US 66, one of the most famous routes in this entire country. The entire interstate highway system overtook it. I know parts of I-70, I-80, a lot of those have just, been overtaken by the interstate highway system. US 71 bypass, this is a bypass, but nevertheless, it still got overtaken by I-435. US 75, the trailing into this got replaced by I-45. And US 136 never gets to meet its parent route anymore. It got overtaken by another interstate. Its parent route is 36. We'll talk about auxiliary routes here in a bit. So the next was the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. This is the real deal. This is what pushed these states to be like, hey, we need to get a move on. We need interstates now. So this act funded the federal government would pay 90% of the cost of all interstates in the boundaries and jurisdictions of its territory, while the states paid the remaining balance of 10%. This is like a huge go. Now, how did the federal government pay for this? They had taxes on gasoline and other fuel. The state governments would quickly follow with this too. So next is the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1968. So, if we have not provided billions of dollars worth of funding for interstate highways, there were some additional rules that were brought to the table. So, displaced families were to be assisted. That was from eminent domain, where states took the land to build the roads. These families had to be assisted and helped and supported now. And then we have a new concept of toll roads. So these are to be improved. In some areas, even made parallel routings to it. So I know in New Jersey, up north especially. So next, environmental factors are to be maximized. This was a small play at the time, but nonetheless, it was part of the act. This is like, how do we make it safe? How do we make it not as much gasoline and stuff on that? Now, we're going to talk about the rules of the road, the heat of this entire thing. So, there's a difference between the highway system and the interstate highway system. So, both have the following rules. There are an exception, such as US 33. I believe that's the only exception. So, we have this is how I remember it. Even east, even east, even east, and then west. And then we have odd, south, and north. So the interstate rules, the lower the even number, the more south it is. The higher the even number, the more north it is. Then you got your odd numbers, the lower the odd, the more west it is. And then the higher the odd, the more east it is. So US routes have sort of the same scheme, except it's completely inverted. I made this chart right here, and there's a little error right here. That should be 101. So your odd numbers, the lower the odd, the more east it is. The higher the odd, the more west it is. The lower your east, the more north it is. And the higher the east is, the more south it is. So it's completely inverted from our interstate routes. This is to not have confusion for the general population, because during the time back then, it was more, how do I say this? They were not easy to dissect. I guess that's the word. So now we're going to talk about auxiliary routes. So it's taken by taking the last two digits of its 3-digit number and the last two digits, it's its parent route. And depending on the first number of the three digits, it can determine how, what the route is. If it's an odd number, it's a spur. If it's an even number, the interstate either connects back or to another interstate, or it's a bypass. Here's an example right here. So our parent route's 10. We see that for all these. The last two digits are 10s. We see that here all over the place. So even connects either to the parent route again, or to another interstate, or a bypass where it connects twice. So it connects here on 610, and it connects here, and then it loops around. 810 connects here, 210 even connects here, and here. Now these spurs only connect once, so these odd numbers only connect once. I-140 in Tennessee is Alcoa. It goes to Alcoa from Knoxville. That's a spur. It never connects back, ever. It leaves its parent and never comes back. So now we're going to talk about highway shield. So here's the interstate shield. Its cardinal direction, which we will talk about later, is I-24. That's not a cardinal direction. Its cardinal direction is east-west. Now, just some little bit of information. This goes from Chattanooga through Paducah, Kentucky to Illinois. This goes a little northwest and southeast. So cardinal directions are just the way it's signed. So this is signed east-west, but it goes northwest and southeast. Same with most U.S. routes, and we will see that idea come up again and again. So this one, for the most part, 65 is mostly a north-south, and it follows that regulation pretty well. US 27, same thing. So now we're going to talk about cardinal directions. So the saying again, even east, west, odd, north, south. And like I said, there are variations to these. US 33 is interesting, and that changes cardinal directions when it enters Indiana. Everything else, it's signed east-west, which is odd because US 33 should be north-south. But the only time it's signed north-south is in Indiana. So that's interesting. And that's it. Next time we will talk about Tennessee, my hometown. And if you won't want me to cover different jurisdictions, feel free to message me, and I'll do my research and cover information on that. Thank you all.